Welcome to Module 4 in Social Problems. I want to do a little bit of a summary of some of the highlights of the discussion from last week. We had a great discussion on the boards. I hope that many of you had a chance to read all of the good comments in addition to posting them. A little bit of feedback. Some of you don't like Revel. I'm going to suggest you try the audio of Revel. You can push a little button that lets you listen to the sound or buy a hard copy. You can find one, I think, on Amazon for about $30 if reading the textbook online is too difficult for you. Some of you aren't liking the TED Talks, mostly because they're hard to understand. Try reading the transcripts instead. The transcripts are all available on the webpage. If you have trouble finding them, just let me know. The metaphor of the island raised a lot of good questions. So ultimately, no one advocated for capitalism, yet most of you believe in capitalism in real life. So some thoughts on that. Capitalism has a lot of advantages, even though it isn't actually very fair and equal. It does privilege some people over others. But it also creates competition, which leads to improvements. It leads to better quality of life. But we shouldn't forget that capitalism is brutal and it's very unpleasant for the people who get the short end of the stick. And the island model hopefully brought that up to you. On the other hand, Wenda and others believe so strongly in capitalism that they want to completely abolish foreign aid in order to support it. There are some real questions here about capitalism, and they won't be answered today. But I encourage you to keep talking about, keep thinking about this model. Talk to other people about this model of the island and see what they think. Several of you missed the point in the discussion about how your church should provide aid. You said things like, well, we should, gather food or we should send over clothes. I think some of you didn't read the story about Qatar that I posted on the very first page, or you didn't quite get the article, the video on Wenda. Several of you also didn't understand what I meant when I asked you to point out the limits of the thought experiments. So we had a couple thought experiments in this model. What we're looking for when I ask you to point out the limits of a thought experiment are ways that the analogy doesn't help us understand the phenomenon we're studying. For example, one limitation of the thought experiment about the desert island is the desert island thought experiment was there to help us try to understand the difference between capitalism and socialism. But a limitation of this thought experiment is that both capitalism and socialism only work in large-scale societies. So it's hard to think about how these systems would work on an island with only 100 people. So it's a good analogy. It has some advantages, but it has limits. And when I'm asking you to point out the limits of the thought experiment, that's the kind of thing I'm looking for. A few of you are getting annoyed that we keep talking about race. You're going to get more annoyed as we keep going, so just brace yourself for that, especially in Module 6, which is all about race. Several of you have found something in the course that has interested you so far, about half. Prefer Revel or Blackboard, one or the other. Most of you don't have anything that makes you want to change the world yet. That's okay. I'm happy that you're interested. There's still time. Some of you feel like the discussion boards are a waste of time, but most of you are actually doing pretty well at them. By the way, I use these discussion boards perhaps differently than other classes. I use these discussion boards to actually teach. So I post an initial question, you reply, and I'll often reply to you right then if you're off. If you've got it wrong, if you're repetitive. And I encourage you to follow up and post again if this happens to you. So the fact that I'm telling you you're wrong is a good clue that you may not end up getting full credit on the discussions. So it's a chance for you to try again. It's also a chance for other students to step in and say, she got it off, I'm going to try it again a little bit. So you're going to want to come back to the discussion boards throughout the week. It's something you'll probably want to revisit. Module 4 is a really easy week, so enjoy it. And I'll see you in Module 5, which might be a little more challenging again.